To an AFTV podcast special. I'm your host Giles, and joining me today is a special guest, James Olley, journalist for the Evening Standard. Good afternoon, James. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Very well.
Thank you for coming on. I want to just discuss Monday night's FA Cup victory over at Man United. It was a great victory. We've exercised the demon. I'm going to use the word exercise quite a lot in this discussion. But we've exercised another demon in going up to Manchester and winning for the first time since, I don't know, donkey's years 2006. Just before the game, when you've got the lineup, you've got the team sheets, what did you make of that lineup?
Well, 5 changes from Queen's Park Rangers. I suppose one or two eyebrows raised about the fact that Danny Welbeck was starting up front ahead of Olivier Giroud. And I know that when I tweeted the team, there were a few disconcerted people, should we say, who were thinking that that Arsene's kind of
lost it,
sacrificing the competition, if you like, with one mind on West Ham and then Monaco next week. But you know, I mean, it looked solid enough. It wasn't as if it was a complete sort of reserve 11, and Arsenal, I think, in the build-up about, you know, wanting to play a strong side. I don't think we thought they'd quite perform as well as they ended up doing, but you know, you can't take anything away from them because they deserved it in the end.
Indeed. The setup was quite interesting. Again, after, you know, using the same kind of similar tactics in terms of allowing Man City the ball and squeezing space, it didn't work against Tottenham. How comes it worked against Man United? What's your perception on that?
Well, I think it was a slightly different system, actually. Last season, we talked a lot about 4-2-3-1 with Arsene, and this season it's sort of changed, really. It's kind of been 4-1-4-1, which I think it was really at City with Coquelin in the hole with 2 ahead of him. I think it was Cazorla and Ramsey that day. And then last night, it kind of went back to 4-2-3-1 again, with Cazorla playing slightly deeper alongside Coquelin and Ozil in a more central position, having played out wide more often than not since his return from injury. And the team had a better balance as a result. And I think, you know, the biggest criticism about the Monaco game really was that imbalance again, that word balance, that, you know, between defending and attacking, between committing the right number of players forward, but just being clever, just game management really, of knowing when to commit players and when not to. No more sort of worse example than obviously when you just got back in the game at 2-1 to then go and concede that third. But again, I thought against United that was excellent. That balance was absolutely perfect. You know, Coquelin I thought had another good game. Cazorla, fantastic ability he has to just get out of trouble, just find little pockets of space to relieve pressure on the back four. And really, they're a better balanced setup than United, who, you know, themselves have had their own issues in terms of formations. They played 3 at the back, they played 4, they played a midfield diamond, they played 4-2-3-1 last night. Rooney's been playing in midfield all over the place, and they're still kind of looking for where their best balance is, or who provides that balance. And I just thought that was the key, just in a different way to City, because they were more defensively minded. I thought City pushed them back for longer periods for a lot more at the Etihad than United did at Old Trafford last night. But the balance of the team was right, and that's really was the key.
And I suppose, again, if you look at the stats, I think I'm not sure we had over 40% possession in the match, but it seemed to be that we trusted ourselves under pressure. We had the coolness of mind to see it, you know, see the open man. Whereas against Tottenham, that wasn't the case. They were in our faces. The press was high and hard, and I suppose Man United don't play like that. But it certainly seemed as like you said, people like Cazorla were able to turn in a sixpence and find an open man. There were times when Mertesacker as well seemed to be under pressure, but again, there was an open man. There seemed to be a lot more confidence and trust in their own ability last night. Would you go along with that?
Yeah, I would, but I think what 2 things to say to that. Firstly, that I think with the team set up as it was, with Sanchez on the left and Ox on the right, it's got more natural width in it, and that helps to relieve pressure. I thought a lot of times they would see an out ball that would be 20 or 30 yards just straight out wide. So just, you know, if a team's pressing you, that's sometimes the quickest way to beat the press, is just to find a ball over the top if you can, to release a wide man. And I thought that was a key part. I I thought that was one of his best games for a while actually last night. I thought he played very well. Sanchez started the game well and then maybe faded a little bit in the second half. But and I think the other point to make is that probably one of the main reasons why Arsene played Danny Welbeck, aside from the obvious motivation of going back to his former club, was that I think sometimes he doesn't always trust Olivier Giroud to press the ball from the front. He's been critical about that in the past, and it's something that I've noticed in press conferences when Arsenal have lost, either post-match or in the preceding press conference for the next game. He's often talked about that need to defend from the front. And Danny Welbeck's very athletic. He works tirelessly for the team, and I think he really set the example for them in terms of shutting down United and not giving them time to play.
If you could rate the play, what would you give them individually? Like starting from Szczesny.
Well, I mean, Wojciech, I don't think he really could do anything about the goal. I think to be fair, Di Maria's cross was absolutely fantastic. Rooney's movement was good. You'd argue the two centre halves there, so you couldn't really fault the goalkeeper. One or two dodgy moments, I thought, in the first half. I think there was one when he sort of punched a cross up in the air.
Spilled one.
Got lucky with it. So you'd probably say 7 or so for him, 6 or say 7 out of 10 for him.
Bellerin, I mean, Bellerin had a yellow card very early on, but for the most part, how would you rate him? What rating out of 10 would you give Bellerin?
I think you'd have to give him a bit lower, just because I actually think he's quite lucky not to be sent off. I mean, particularly at Old Trafford when they were baying for really, and that second yellow card I think wouldn't have been out of place. So he was taken off before he was sent off, which, to be fair to Arsenal, but there was a game when Jack Wilshere was on a yellow card, got away with one, and they left him on and he got sent off a while back. And at least they acted positively this time. But I'd have to say Bellerin probably get a 6.
And the two centre halves, how would you rate? For me, I thought that Mertesacker at first didn't start great, but he grew into the game. I think his distribution's still a bit off. There were certain balls he was playing up front. I'm not sure if it was Danny Welbeck's fault for not showing for the ball, or if he was just hoofing it 30 yards up into the air for the defence to get onto. But how would you rate the two centre halves?
Yeah, probably 2 7s, I'd say. I mean, I think Mertesacker was possibly slightly at fault for Rooney's goal, insofar as if you watch that goal again, there is a big space between the two of them, and that space is probably responsible. Or Pear's responsible for that, for not quite coming over and closing that down. But they gave one or two frantic moments, but then it was that kind of game. I mean, both sides had that sort of panic at times at the back, but those two held firm. And the key thing with that game really was that they didn't concede any silly mistakes. There were no individual errors, which obviously United suffered, and that ultimately cost them the game.
Indeed, and Nacho was again very good, wasn't he, last night?
Yeah, absolutely. Second goal for the club. He scored a very important one against Swansea, I think, in the league, and that was his first FA Cup goal. Good finish, beat the hair at his near post. I spoke to him afterwards, and he's absolutely delighted with it. And it was interesting that he was saying to me that an important part of how he's developed this season has been the faith that Arsene's shown in him, because I think he thought he was in and out of the team last season, and he seemed to feel justifiably so, because he basically wasn't turning it on when he was getting the opportunity. So I think now he's had a consistent run, he's reaping the benefits of that.
And the midfield, if we just take the midfield as a whole, I mean, who stood out for you in that midfield?
Well, it'd have to be Cazorla. He's been somebody who it's difficult to know whether this sort of central role has come in a bit more by judgment, really, because Santi started his career really out wide, didn't he? And really, of course, this season he played in a more central role, but he's got such intelligence in that position that he's kind of showing that sort of maturity that I think maybe Wenger hopes Jack Wilshere will eventually show on a more consistent basis. He's really flourished, and I think he won more tackles than any other player last night. And I know he recorded a higher pass completion rate. And when you think about just those two characteristics in that kind of game. All right, if you go back 10 years, 15 years, and you look at the Arsenal Man United games around that time when it was Vieira and Keane and it was very physical, you'd say maybe he might have got bullied out of it. But now it's a more technical affair. To have somebody in there who's got that eye for a pass, but can also get their foot in, can be intelligent and sensible under pressure with the ball, and really release that tension at a ground at Old Trafford where, as we all know, when they get on top of you, it can be very difficult to get out. I think Cazorla really was the one that stood out with me, probably along with Ox. I thought Ox, it's a real shame that he came off just after the start of the second half, because I thought he really caused their left-hand side problems, Luke Shaw and Marcus Rother.
Indeed. Just talking about the substitution at half-time, we weren't sure why they won. Do you know, was it tactical or was it injury? I mean, was it because Alex was giving Shaw such a torrid time that they thought, right, we're going to change this from a 3 to a 4 or whatever formation they went into?
I was down in the mix zones, so I didn't actually hear Louis van Gaal's press conference afterwards, but I believe it. I mean, it looked tactical to me. I mean, Ander Herrera is somebody who I know some United fans who would like to see him playing far more often, and he doesn't seem to be in Van Gaal's good book. So I think he may have been maybe a scapegoat for what was going on in the first half. I mean, Luke Shaw's had problems, I suppose, with injury, so maybe that was a fitness issue in that respect, but. Yeah, I mean, interesting from a United point of view that Radamel Falcao didn't see anything of the game.
Yeah.
You think when they're 2-1 down and they've got a striker they've already paid $6 million for, that he'd want to come on at some point.
Bizarre. Coquelin, second time at Old Trafford. The first time around was his first Premiership start for Arsenal. He was part of the 8-2 debacle. We all know what Ferguson said in his autobiography. He said he probably wouldn't hear much from him again. I mean, it seems to have come full circle. Last night's display was another impressive display, wasn't it, of maturity. I thought he anticipated the danger well and he covered ground prodigiously. I mean, do you think that Wenger likes to talk about finding the internal solutions? Do you think he is that internal solution in terms of the DM, or do you think we'll go out and buy another one?
That's the question. I don't want to be negative about it, because he's come so far such a short time. When you think that he was on at Charlton as recently as ever, I'm not entirely convinced about him in the big games. I would have to say it would still represent a gamble for me if Arsenal were to go to next season not sign another defensive midfielder. They are looking in that area, perhaps not with the same urgency that they were earlier, because Coquelin has admitted himself, has almost come from nowhere really, in terms of going from a loanee to a really integral part of the first team. I think at the very least what he's done is he's shown Arsene the importance of having a specialist in that position. I think he's really learnt a lot about what that kind of player can provide, and Coquelin, I think, has curbed his more natural attacking instincts to become a more disciplined figure in that, and take nothing away from how well he's done. But I would say if you're talking about trying to win the league next season, is Coquelin up there, with a Matic? Has he got that kind of presence about him to really influence the big games, consistent basis? He may well have, but for next season, personally, I would like to see another body in there.
Okay, cool. All right. Moving forward to the more attacking areas, we've already spoke about Alexis Oxlade-Chamberlain. Sanchez, high work rate again, seemed to drop off. What kind of rating would you give him?
I think, I mean, look, in the first half, he looked like he had the beating of Antonio Valencia almost every time he got the ball. So you'd say on the first half, 8, but I just think he faded a little in influence in the second half. I mean, part of that was down to the way that the game went. United went chasing it, and Arsenal played a bit more on the counter attack, and he wasn't as involved as he might have been otherwise had the game been a bit different. Maybe the number of matches he had means that maybe higher a little bit in the second half, but I wouldn't be critical of him for that. So I'd I'd say 7.5.
Okay, cool. And then going on to Danny Welbeck, I mean, he worked again. He was another one that worked hard. Did you think before he scored it was about time to take him off, or did you think that Wenger, or you didn't see much of a problem him staying on? I mean, a lot of people around where I was standing, upper tier, were saying that it might be time to take him off. He seemed to be wearing down, and he wasn't chasing as hard as he was earlier in the match, and it might have been time for someone like Giroud to come on so the ball could stick to him. I mean, what was your feelings before that you scored the goal?
I mean, the longer it stayed 1-1, the more I thought, yes, bring Olley on, because it's like for like in the sense of the team set up, not going to occasion, and if you want to try and attack in different ways and change the game, you can do that with a player in behind you, so you can keep that sort of fulcrum in attack. I mean, as I said earlier, Robert very hard for the team, and there's probably an element of fatigue in the second half. I mean, I think he did a lot of work without the ball to stop United play. But once he scored, there was obviously that little adrenaline rush that kept him going a little bit longer. But I think bringing Olivier on went on did just freshened it up and just helped the team there with the momentum. Now,
there's been a lot of talk about his celebration and this debate about should you celebrate if you score against your former team. For me, I didn't mind. I didn't care that Van Persie celebrated against us last season. I mean, is it a nothing argument for you, or do you think that home fans or jilted fans have a point?
I think if you've been at a football club from the age of 8. And you've been brought right the way through the ranks, and you left not necessarily reluctantly, but let's be fair. He was made purpose to requirements at Man United. He didn't push to leave, didn't ask to leave. It become clear that he was going to play a peripheral role, and Louis van Gaal, because he came out with that statement that he felt he wasn't up to the standard. So, Danny was a reluctant leaver. So when he goes back, when you're talking about, as I say, somebody who's been there 14, 15 years and through all of his adolescence and, had his education at that club, I could understand why, he'll have mixed emotions about it. Personally, the team that pays his wages, the team that he prepares for all week, the team that he wants to win things with is Arsenal. So when Arsenal score, whether he scores that goal or not, in my opinion, he should celebrate. But at the same time, I have no problem with it with an individual. I think it's a case by case basis. If somebody's been there, so if he'd been at Man United for 18 months, 1-0, played half a dozen times, and then he goes back, scores against them, doesn't celebrate, I'd think that's ridiculous. But, for a kid who's been there, as I say, 14, 15 years, to go back, he celebrated a bit, he then kind of applauded the home fan. I think part of it is interesting, because, when his number came up, the home fans booed him, and then he applauded them, and then they applauded him.
Yeah.
So it was a kind of a sort of,
bittersweet kind of thing.
Yeah, it was a sort of domino effect, really. I think they decided they were going to give him a pretty good reception. Then he scored. Then he celebrated, so they weren't happy. But then he applauded them, so they were okay with it again. So it's I think in that case it's a strange one, really, because, as I say, he's been there so long that he'd be lying if he didn't say there's still a little bit of him that probably wants to see United do well. Yeah. I saw him afterwards. Yeah. He was in the tunnel after the game, and I know he stayed up in Manchester after the game, and he was chatting with Ashley Young and Chris Smalling and a few of the English lads at United. So there's no animosity there. With I'm sure he's still got a lot of friends at the club.
I understand that Per Mertesacker said that he felt a bit, well, I don't know if sad is the right word, but there was mixed emotions for him in the dressing room, having scored the winner, and maybe the reaction of some of the crowd might have got to him. But Per said, "Look, you're at Arsenal now. You're going to make more memories." It must have been difficult for him. For me, his celebration for me seemed to be more of a sort of more of a statement to maybe Van Gaal, and say, in so much as I am a striker, I know my ability, rather than stick it up at Man United sort of thing, stick two fingers up. I don't know.
No, I would agree with that. I think he got it about right. He scored, he celebrated, he didn't go over the top. and he got on with it. You know, I mean, if he'd done an Adebayor and run the full length pitch, and
Stretford end
on his knees, then you might have had more of a case to argue with him. But I think he was fine.
Great stuff. All right, moving on. What is this? First of all, before we move on, the ref, Michael Oliver. I thought he had a pretty good game for most parts. I think he was a very lenient on what's his name, Fellaini. But for the most part, I think he had a very good game. He was very mature. He considered his decisions seemed to be considered. Is there? I'm hearing that Man United fans weren't particularly pleased with the fact that he didn't send off Bellerin earlier, and he was a bit too card happy with Man United players rather than Arsenal players. But how did you see his performance?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is he got the Di Maria incident spot on. You know, that looked a dive to me at the time. His reaction was completely out of order, and I mean, the only thing I would have said maybe was that if you grab a referee, is that okay? Grab the back of a referee's shirt. To be fair, if we want to be accurate about it, is that not a straight red card? I mean, I was surprised at the time that it was a second yellow. You know, the Januzaj dive late on was a blatant dive. That was a booking. Marouane Fellaini committed an awful lot of fouls. I'm sure it was 8.
Yeah, that's what I got. Yeah.
You know, which is an awful. That's an awful lot in one game. And really, when he got his yellow card, he'd had about 3 in the space of 5 minutes. You know. Yeah. So I don't think on an individual case basis. I mean, Rojo's tackle was yellow minimum. You know. So I mean, they had. I think it was 5-6 players booked. 2 for diving, as we talked about Fellaini, we talked about Rojo. I don't think there really can be any complaints in that respect. I think the only thing he got wrong, I think, was the Bellerin. You know, I think Arsenal got one there. I think Bellerin should have been sent off. I think that was a second yellow card, and I can understand from United's point of view that they may feel, well, you know, had we been playing 11v10, you know, we might have got a draw out of it. But you know, there was a lot of anger around the ground with the way that Di Maria was treated, and I don't think there had any justification there whatsoever. I thought it took a very strong referee to make that decision. Especially with a player of his reputation, you know, British record transfer fee at Old Trafford, that kind of atmosphere, big game, FA Cup quarter final, to be able to stand up and make the right decision with Di Maria, and then with Januzaj, when United were chasing the game, baying for blood, wanting a penalty right at the end, to book him as he did absolutely correctly again. I think the referee, on balance, comes out with a lot of credit.
Indeed. Consistency. Playing against big teams. I mean, can Arsenal get it? We're very Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, we've been up to Manchester twice now. We've defeated both the Manchester clubs, and then we go to Tottenham, and it all comes apart. You know, we've got Liverpool and Chelsea coming up. I mean, and then obviously the Monaco game. Can Arsenal get consistent? Can they, you know, do you feel that it's a mental thing, or is it a personnel thing, or is it a tactical thing? Are they capable? Are they just a few percent below the level needed to be as consistent as, say, Jose Mourinho's teams?
I think they need 1 or 2 players in the summer. And I think a lot of this comes down simply to mentality, because if you look overall, have they got the quality on their day to beat a Chelsea, to beat United, to beat Man City? Well, they've shown that, you know, but can they do it consistently over the course of the season? Well, at the moment, they have to say no, and I think the reason for that is because their game management is not good enough. They don't control situations. You know, they can be set up to play a certain way, but then players on the pitch need to make certain decisions. And yes, you can point the finger at the manager to some extent, because he should be able to say from the sidelines, you know, don't go forward, mark that guy, sit in for 10 minutes. But there are a lot of little instances where you think players should be just making better decisions on the pitch. You think of one that's just popped into my head was the Swansea game, when Callum Chambers was getting just done down that right hand side over and over again by Jefferson Montero. And if you're Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain ahead of him, and this is not to single out Alex, by the way, because you know, this is just an example.
You're right. I'm not sure what happened there. He's right in mid-flow as well. We seem to be all right now. You were talking about
mentality.
Mentality. You're talking about Jefferson, Montero, Callum Chambers, and Oxlade-Chamberlain leaving him exposed. Not to call him out.
Yeah, I mean, I just felt that was an example of where, you know, players need to be making decisions on the pitch to just get themselves through moments in matches, and too often we see that in Arsene. Sort of, I think he kind of hints at it himself when he talks about naivety. I think when he's talking about naivety in the team's play, that's really what he means. That, you know, too often there are players who are allowing mistakes to happen or situations to be created where you know, they're at risk of conceding, and that really has been a cyclical problem. I guess this is a wordy way of saying that they lack leaders, which I think is a very simplistic way of looking at it. But I do think sometimes, if you look at Chelsea, for example, or Manchester City or United a few years ago, they have that kind of intelligence to be able to know when to attack, to know when to shut down an opposition, when to keep the ball for 10 minutes, and just how to win matches. And that, I think, is a knowledge you only really acquire over time, as you win things together as a group. And I think that's why a lot of people hope that the FA Cup win last year would be a stepping stone towards that. But I still think they've got a few steps to make before they're consistently winning these big matches. Okay.
The upshot of the Arsenal result is we've got either Bradford City or Reading. Now, for Arsenal fans, I think for some reason we've got this. We want to revisit the Bradford game. We want to exercise that ghost from a couple of years ago, more so than the Reading game. But I wouldn't, without trying to be disrespectful for Bradford, but it's as good a draw as you could have got in the FA Cup.
Well, I mean, you'd have looked at it and you wouldn't have wanted Liverpool. I mean, nobody would have wanted Liverpool. The FA wouldn't have wanted Liverpool for the final. You know, the Arsenal fans, I'm sure, wouldn't have wanted Liverpool, and Liverpool would have wanted to avoid Arsenal and make sure they get Steven Gerrard to Wembley, which is sort of their big goal. So, you know, it's the best. Well, probably not. Maybe if you're a Bradford or a Reading fan, but I think it's the best draw for the vast majority of people in any case. And look, I mean, Arsenal will know that they're overwhelming favourites to that game. If they turn up and they do their jobs properly, they'll get to the FA Cup final. And when you when you plan a semi-final, if you've presented with that picture before you take it every time.
Just quickly on the ticket allocation thing. I mean, over the years, and not only Arsenal supporters, but every fan, every group, every member of the teams that go to Wembley complain about the 25,000 allocation and the rest of them, the tickets going to the football family and making its way to the touts and the neutrals. Yeah. Is there any progress on that now? I mean, I know FSF have put forward a paper to the FA and so on, talking about asking or requesting that this be looked at. I mean, is there any sort of inclination in the FA's part to release more tickets to the two clubs competing? Maybe like with an Arsenal, we've got a fantastic fan base. Surely we should be looking for more tickets, as would Liverpool if they make it to the semi-final, and Aston Villa. Is there any move in that score?
Well, I mean, firstly, it's obviously an initiative that I would probably support. There's nothing better than. I mean, that's the best atmosphere at Old Trafford, and I go up not just for Arsenal games, but with Tottenham and with the other Chelsea, with the other London clubs as well, and that was a fantastic atmosphere last night. And you, in a way, you kind of want FA Cup crowds every week in the Premier League, because it just, you double the away allocation almost anywhere you go, and you're just automatically going to get a better atmosphere because the away fans are in stronger voice, which makes the home fans want to retaliate, and the whole game, is energised as a result of it. The problem is, Giles, is that it comes down to money at the end of the day. The FA have, particularly with Wembley, they have bills to pay, and we all know that the corporate element involving Club Wembley is very important to simply servicing the debt on the stadium. And I think until they reach a time where that debt no longer exists, or they've found enough alternative revenue streams to not rely on those kind of big occasions to pay the bills or to do the back scratching they need to, then I think it will probably stay the way it is.
Okay, cool. All right, moving on. Wenger, how was his mood in the post-match presser last night?
Well, as I say, I was down with the players, so I didn't see him there. I saw him briefly in the tunnel afterwards, and I thought there was a lovely moment I saw on telly, actually, on one of the replays, as he was walking down the tunnel, along the pitch towards the tunnel, and he just allowed himself a very wry smile, and I think he was very very happy afterwards, and quite rightly so. I think he knows that the pressure, whoever lost that game, whichever manager lost that game, was going to be under a lot of pressure. And what I think the consequence of this game is for Arsene is that Monaco now is not. It's not win or bust in Monte Carlo. It's not season over if they lose that game. And I think that's placed a whole different dimension on next week, and really given them a positive momentum to take into the final 10 games in the Premier League, because both United and Arsenal are obviously scrambling to get that top 4 place, 2 really available, with Chelsea and City you'd think guaranteed to take. Do you think
City are guaranteed for second?
Guaranteed for second? Yes, I think so. Just because I think they are the 2 best teams in the league by some distance. I think they will get second. I think they'll try and chase down Chelsea, but I think Chelsea will win it. I think City will be second. I think Arsenal will be third. I said United would be fourth in August, but you got to look at Liverpool and think they're a good bet for that now.
Okay, cool. All right, so going on to the Chelsea game, Demons again, haven't beaten him in 13-14 attempts. Jose Mourinho, that is. At least Chelsea are coming to the Emirates. If you're a betting man, where would you put your money?
I am a betting man, but the problem is the book is always happy to see me, so I don't really know what I'm doing. Look, I mean, you would assume that Chelsea are going to approach that game in the way that they tend to do away from home, or Mourinho certainly does tend to do away from home, and did very well in the Capital One Cup final, and just try and shut the game down. And I think Arsenal need to look at that game, and this is not to be negative, but to say a draw is not the worst thing in the world here. What we don't want to do is kind of undermine the positivity and the feeling that the team's moving forward from the games against City and United, and just go back to gung-ho, going for it, and just getting picked off on the break. I think Arsene would take a 0-0, actually. I think he'd say, well, look, let's be solid, let's try and nick a goal, but first and foremost, let's not lose the game, because, the margin for error in terms of trying to finish third or fourth, or second, I suppose, is a lot greater than trying to win the league. And if you were going for the title, then dropping 2 points in that situation could be damaging. But given Arsenal's run-in, and given the run-in, I mean, United have got a horrendous next 5 or 6 matches. They've got a very difficult run now coming up. A draw is not a bad result, and hopefully what Arsene's maybe remembered from before over the last sort of 3 or 4 months is that pragmatism isn't a bad thing. It's not sometimes a bad result to take a draw and move on.
Quite okay. Theo Walcott, he got stripped, as we saw on the sideline. Thought he was coming on. It was Aaron Ramsey that came on instead. Arsenal fans are in all kinds. There's all kinds of speculation, whether it's the contract situation, whether is he feeling his way back, is it a confidence thing, is he not quite 100% over the injury, the ACL injury, or whether does Wenger not trust him enough? Where do you see it?
There's a combination of reasons for that. Firstly, that they were very, very mindful of the ACL injury and not rushing it back. That was a big part of why he didn't play regularly when he was pretty much fit and available for several weeks. Well, maybe not several weeks, but certainly a couple of weeks before we actually saw him on the pitch. They really didn't want to have another setback with him, and they were very ultra cautious in that respect. So I think that explains some of it. I think partly we go back to talking about the balance of the team, and I I'm a huge fan of Theo's. I like him as a bloke, and I like him as a player. And I think he gives you that kind of. He scares teams in a way that nobody else in that Arsenal side does. That blistering pace. Okay, I know Sanchez is quick. I know Ox is quick. I know that there is pace elsewhere in the team. But just in terms of the direct, making defenders turn their backs and have to chase behind, they hate that. And we've seen that from Barcelona to Barnsley. Every single team doesn't like that. So I'd like to see Theo in the team. But I think at the moment he feels that with the players that he's got in those attacking positions, they give him a better balance defensively and offensively, and that's seen Theo marginalised. But I hope to see more of him in the coming weeks, because I really think he's a strong asset.
And in terms of the contract situation, Wenger said it's early days, and these things we know from history. He said that these things with Theo and his agent takes time. We're not in the same position we were. That was 2 years ago or so. We're much more stronger, in a much more financially stable and stronger position. Do you think there's a chance that we could, if Theo doesn't accept whatever offers put on the table, that we could sell him in the summer?
There's always a chance, but I don't think so. Look, Theo's, he's married, he's got a kid, he's settled, he's an Arsenal fan, he's obsessed with Thierry Henry. He's really, he's a homegrown product with respect to the work that Southampton did before he joined. He has no desire to leave. He's not somebody who's particularly driven by money. He's not a mercenary. He's very settled where he is. If he's not playing, if we're sat here in 10 Premier League games time and he's played, an hour here, 10 minutes there, and he's not started, then, he might start asking some questions. But he's not the type of player who's going to kick up a fuss and demand a move.
Last time it was down to, as far as we know, as far as he was concerned, it was down to, he wanted to be central, to play more central. You can't really see that happening now, given the personnel that we have, and where he is in the pecking order. If it's not about money, and it is about getting game time, do you think he'd be happy just to be playing on the wing? Do you think? I mean, when he got his injury against Tottenham last season, he was tried up front and he did pretty well. Do you think that could play a part? I mean, it wasn't written into his contract, but it was part of the negotiations that he wanted assurances that he would be played up front on a more regular basis, and clearly that doesn't look like happening. You're right. I mean, I would say there have been times when Arsenal's played 4-4-2, so you could change the system and you could play Theo through the middle with Giroud or with Welbeck. And equally, if they play 4-3-3, you could argue that the two wide men are almost, I think the inside forward is the traditional term, that they are almost playing so far advanced. So yeah, I mean, that could become an issue, but, as I say, I just don't think there's any desire for Theo to want to leave the club. Okay, no problem. All right. Let's move on to the final topic, and it's the quickfire round. I'm just going to fire some questions at you if you just give us one-word answers. So we'll start with, will Arsenal win the FA Cup? Yes. Right. Where will Arsenal finish in the league? Third. And can we get to Berlin 2015? No. Ooh. Do you think we'll beat Monaco? I think they will beat Monaco, but I don't think they'll do it with a sufficient score to go through. Asked the wrong question. All right. And yellow and blue, or two shades of blue? I'd say yellow's probably more traditional, isn't it? So I'd go yellow and blue. Yeah, great stuff. All right, James, I want to thank you for coming on. It's been a great having a discussion with you. I don't even need to tell the people who you are, where they can find you. James Olley, Evening Standard. You're the man when it comes to Arsenal. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out. You're welcome. No problems. Thanks for having me on. Thank you very much. And that was James Olley from the Evening Standard. Catch us again on the Arsenal Fan TV podcast as we review the West Ham United game this weekend. Thank you and goodbye.